Hello, BookTube, and welcome to the Future History Project. This is week 15, part 2, where it's a catch-up week. This is reading The Positronic Man. It's a novelization by Robert Silverberg, and Isaac Asimov's name is on here too, but it was published in 1992. I'm not sure how much Isaac Asimov had to do with the final story. Basically, it's Robert Silverberg just fleshing out the story Bicentennial Man, the 1976 short story slash novella. And Robert Silverberg does, I think, a fantastic job with this. Where, as I was saying in the sort of upcoming and response video that I did yesterday, that Isaac Asimov is sort of a pared down writing, and he uses a lot of shortcuts. He doesn't go into too much detail for location or anything. And for the novelization, Robert Silverberg follows that, but gives more detail. For instance, there's not a lot of detail about the house or the grounds where Andrew is, where he serves as sort of he serves as a robot of, doing butlering, valeting, cleaning, cooking, whatever that's needed. And also, he takes care of and he plays with the two children, Little Miss and Miss. And in Robert Silverberg's book, he expands that there's a little more description of the house and where it's located, that it's located out in the country, sort of on the coast, on the outside of San Francisco, on the California coast. And he goes several times on walks with the children down a steep sort of pathway to the ocean. And we get a little more internal thoughts of what makes Andrew tick, in other words. But also we learned it's a bit in the short story one too, that there was a decentralization of population moving from cities into the country. It reminded me of City by Clifford Simak, with decentralization of cities and people having plots in the country and working and viewing things remotely, like we are today, in a sense, but also having robots helping them. But anyway, that's the situation there, and the population of the Earth has dwindled at this time, and it starts out just over a century after. Well, it starts out in the late 21st century. And it goes for 200 years, hence Bicentennial Man. And as I say, there's more details. There's more details of every step along the way with Andrew, and a little more deeper into his psychology to a certain extent, because we do learn from the first from the short story from 1976, and in this one, that there probably was a bit of a flaw, or not so much flaw, but because of the way the positronic brain is constructed with millions of pathways, that everyone's going to be a bit different. There's going to be some quirks and possibly errors, and sometimes they can, as we've seen throughout the robot stories, errors can mean big things. But this time it just sort of has tweaked it a little bit. And it's allowed Andrew to be artistic. But not just artistic, he begins, that's his sort of beginning journey, is the artistry of carving in wood, furniture, jewelry, you name it. But he begins to want other things. He because of the help from Little Miss, the daughter of Martin, he's very fond of her, and she thinks that, and she's fond of him, and she thinks that, you know, he should benefit from his work, his artistry. So the father sets up an account for him, and a trusteeship and everything through a lawyer firm. And Andrew gets rather rich from this, and his father, the Little Miss's father, gives him the name Martin, so he's Andrew Martin. That's what his bank is, and he can sign checks and so forth. And he decides at some point that he wants his freedom, because he's sort of owned by Mr. Martin, and Sir, as he calls him. But he wants to buy his freedom, and that causes a rift between him and Martin. But Sir, but he sort of gets over it in the end, and he does get his freedom. He gets his legal freedom and he does buy his freedom. In the short story, he gives a check, and I think it's implied that the family accepts it. But in this one, he endorses it back as a bonus to Andrew, so he doesn't really lose it. So he keeps the money. And when Sir dies, things change a little bit too. And Andrew feels that he has a little more freedom. But like he wanted this freedom. It's just like, it wasn't that he was just going to get up and walk away. He just wanted to be recognized as that he had this freedom, that he could do it if he wanted to, which is another little quirk in his programming. And he decides he wants to write a history of, well, he wants to learn more about humans and their language, because he realizes that the language is going to be evolving and he needs to keep up with it, because he's going to be living for a long time. But also, in the process of this, he wants to write a history of robots. So he does this over decades, actually. And he gets the grandson and great-grandson of Sir to help him and find a publisher, and it goes over extremely well with the public. However, as we found out, the U.S. Robots and Mechanical Men are not pleased with this, and they're changing their whole system of how robots are, because they don't want another Andrew to happen. So basically, the robots will be controlled by a central computer, and they, for the most part, they will be brainless and remotely controlled. And it's an interesting thing. Like I say, it gives a little more thought process to Andrew, not in super detail, but you just sort of go, like, he does one thing, and he learns, and he the way he's treated, he goes, well, I want to be human, and that's what he's striving for. He wants to be human. But the other thing about the background, there's a little more detail of how the population of the Earth has dwindled, as I was saying. This is a bit, well, if we jump 3,000 years in the future to Caves of Steel and Naked Sun, where the Earth is overpopulated, and because of the population, they're stuck in domed cities because of pollution and everything too. And I believe there was some nuclear war at some point, but it might have. Okay, sorry, I might be getting this. I might be jumping the gun there. It might have happened after, but yeah. So he's as Asimov sort of did this in the Bicentennial Man story as well. So we've got a big chunk here of time, which I really don't think is explored that much. It's explored to a certain extent in other stories or possibilities that could fit in. And that's an interesting thing, and we will get to some of those as time goes on. And I think that some of the non-Asimov material sort of breaches. Well, no, it actually goes. They're after the Caves of Steel and everything, so there is a gap there, but there is some looking back, some history, a little bit. But also too, something that was interesting with this is when he wants to upgrade to a an android body. It's not perfect. But he wants to become human, and he creates all these prosthetics and everything, and he patents them, so he becomes extremely rich. He's privileged. He's like a rich kid who, whatever they want, they can get. He has to work for it, but he's got the money to take the time to get what he wants, and he wants certain rights, and he wants a body that's more human, and he wants to be called a human legally. And there's a little more description of the legal process, which is kind of interesting because it was a long sort of, described in a few pages in the original, but here it's drawn out a little more, and how they sort of manipulate what a human, to describe what is human because of the prosthetics. The company takes to court, or there's a court case between somebody who has a robotic prosthetic heart, and they're saying, well, he's not human, he's a robot because he's got a prosthetic heart. So it goes through all the courts and the arguing, and the thing that they say is that makes the person, it's not the constituent parts, it's the brain. It's the brain that's different because it's an organic brain that's human, and the positronic brain is not organic, obviously. So eventually, they're still struggling to, or he's struggling to get, a law passed to say he's human, and it's not really happening. But he realizes it's the brain thing, and he just cannot understand how humans can't realize that it's what's how the brain works, not whether it's organic or inorganic. That's his belief, but that's sort of a holdback for being a robot, because he just can't understand sometimes the irrational things that humans do. He becomes human in many other ways, but the irrational things just don't seem to click with him. He doesn't understand it. So, but it's an interesting thing because there was a comment made on the Bicentennial Man video, and saying, and I think it's a valid comment, that it seems to be something that has been inherent in science fiction, where robots want to become human. And as they mentioned, Data on Star Trek, The Next Generation, wants to become human, and there's this thing, and it is a sort of a pathos, I guess, and sentimentality thing, that it's noble for a robot to want to become human. But in reality, why? Like, it's like, I sort of think that there was a flaw in Andrew, but there was no good robo-psychologist there to put him through therapy. Where was Susan Calvin? Well, she was dead. But, like, he needed probably some good psychotherapy to get him out of this, to a certain extent. But because he's doing this, it's also an interesting thing, because he's still part robot. Like, he wants to serve humanity, and he does that by these prosthetics as well, by extending the life of humans. And he sort of thinks that that in a way he deserves to become human because he's doing this for humanity. But an interesting thing is when he does get an operation to sort of limit and to allow his brain to die, because when he went to more organic body, they had to use a sort of a fiber, nerve system to connect the positronic brain and to shield it from the effects of the body of organic material. It's, don't know how that works, but okay, that's a willing suspension of disbelief. Fine. So, and he does this, and it's interesting. The doctor is a robot that's doing it, and it reminds me because again, it's like I said before in the previous video of sort of a Asimov style. He doesn't reject anything. He recycles material, and this is sort of I think him recycling and Robert Silverberg, taking it a little step further. I'm trying to see if I can find the I think it's Segregationalist, where the story where the human wants a robotic type heart or part, and the robot, they're realizing that, robots are wanting to become more human, and humans are wanting to become more robotic. And that's the way it is in the Positronic Man and Bicentennial Man. Also, too, it's sort of a thing against, in a sense, the evolution of robots. And in Thou Art, that Thou Art Mindful of Him, in the introduction to The Complete Robot, he talks about that these were sort of the two final robot stories, and that they were sort of taken in different paths. One becoming, a robot becoming human, or the robots in Thou Art Mindful of Him want to sort of, in a sense, it's left that robots should be allowed to evolve themselves, being called humans. But we see this occasionally throughout in some of the stories that Asimov had. The robots are evolving separately a little bit. But there is this thing in science fiction that it's something noble. And it does seem a bit old, and I use that, in quotation marks, old at this point. And I don't know if it's something that's specifically American science fiction, but it could be, it could very well be. It could be sort of striving to be part of something bigger. It's sort of like, the immigrants coming to the United States and wanting to become American. And that's what it's compared to in this, where he's saying that why can't I become a human, where when there were countries before, an Italian, I don't know what nationality, but an Italian could become a Spaniard, legally, by doing certain things to become a Spanish citizen. And that could very well be a part of the basis for why this is there. It could be the underlying foundation, especially maybe with Asimov. It could very well be, because he obviously was born in Russia, but he was American, and he grew up American, So that could be it. It's an interesting thing. If you have any thoughts on this, please do sound out in the comments. But yeah, I just like how things are recycled a little bit through there, and this theme of wanting to become human isn't always it with all robots. A lot of robots in science fiction are more human than human in many ways, but they don't want to be human. They don't strive like Andrew was to become human. And again, I'm gonna bring up Clifford Simak here, because it's a perfect analogy in many ways to things, because his robots are in some ways similar to, or can be similar to, Isaac Asimov's. And Isaac Asimov did like Simak style, and I think there was a lot of borrowing, but also Simak borrowed from other writers, especially like from the Eando Binder. Sorry, I always say Binder. The Adam Link stories, especially, and Lester Del Rey's Helen O'Loy, that they're very human, but they don't sort of strive to be human. That's the one thing that's different. And Clifford Simak's robots, especially thinking of Jenkins in City, he doesn't want to become human. He knows what he is, but he is satisfied where he is and what he does, serving the Webster family, and then later the inheritors, the dogs. But he does get an evolved body eventually. But and that's the one thing with a lot of Simak's robots. They are more human than human in some ways, and some of his aliens are too. And that's a different argument. But it is something that is very, and it's a very sentimental attitude, I guess, to be wanting to become human, and there's a lot of pathos in it, and that is sort of sometimes seen as bad in stories, pathos or sentimentality. There's a lot of people that don't like it. I don't mind sentimentality because I think it can work. I don't like it all the time, and sometimes it can be over sentimental. The novelization of Bicentennial Man into Positronic Man, it steps occasionally over into the over sentimentalization, but not so much. It pulls back a little bit, and then it just works as a nice story. However, is it, like, I guess I would ask myself, is it better with all the extra material, with the extra local color, if you want to call it that, or the more explanations than the Bicentennial Man? And I'm not 100% sure. I like the stripped down aspect of Bicentennial Man, and it leaves more to sort of your imagination for things. He's getting to the point, and there's more storytelling, obviously, and obviously background and everything in Positronic Man. So I think they both work. They both work in a different way. You get more feeling, you get more depth, you get more sentimentality with the Positronic Man. Definitely more feeling, more emotion, more raw emotion for the reader in Positronic Man than you do in Bicentennial Man. Bicentennial Man, it's the emotions there, the pathos is there, but it's a bit more on the clinical side, and it definitely Robert Silverberg is working on the emotions in Positronic Man, which is there in the story anyway, so he hasn't added anything that shouldn't be there. It does fit, but how much of it is the big question. So, but anyway, the next week for me to catch up on is week 16, which is Nemesis, and I'll be doing that slowly over the next few days. So the Future History project videos will slow down a little bit from now on until I get caught up, and I figure I'll be caught up by week 20. So we are officially going into week 18, so and then 19 and 20. So somewhere around that, I should be caught up to things and doing it on a weekly basis from then on. And knock on wood, everything goes well after that. Anyway, but if you are wanting to know what the reading is, please go back to yesterday's future reading and my response to some emails that I had received regarding the Future History Project. Anyway, any thoughts, do feel free to email me or sound out in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Take care.